5 people swiftly appeared in the room containing the core of the array. They had sensed something amiss when the array was destroyed and rushed to the prison as fast as they could. Unfortunately, they were one step too late. Their group consisted of 3 members of the Empyrean Circle. One of them cursed. "Damn it, what's going on?" The other 2 members were elderly martial artists. They spotted a figure lying on the ground. It was Emery. They hurried over and helped him up. They were dressed in the same attire, except one of them carried a sword case on his back. They transferred their inner energy into Emery to regulate his breathing and heal his injuries, but it wasn't effective. Emery was already on the verge of death. The only reason he was still alive was because he forced himself to hold on until reinforcements arrived. He needed to inform them of the situation. He struggled to speak and only managed 4 words. "Man in a black robe." "Stop talking. Use your strength to recover." The elderly man with the sword case transferred more of his energy, but he understood that it was futile. Emery pulled his hand away and shook his head. His gaze dimmed, and he took his last breath. The 2 elderly men were quiet as they grieved for him. The 3 Empyrean Circle members shared a look. One of them broke the silence. "Mr. Hyde, Mr. Teakin, now is not the time to get emotional. The riots are out of control. We need to stop them." "My older brother just passed away," Hyde snapped. "Can't you give me a minute to mourn?" The elderly man with the sword case, Tegan, interjected. "Hyde, don't be rude. Trey's right. We have something important to do." Hyde understood what they were trying to say, but he found it difficult to accept his brother's sudden death. Seeing that things weren't going well, another Empyrean Circle member spoke up. "Mr. Emery wouldn't want to see you like this. Maybe the culprit is among the prisoners. We'll catch them and avenge him." Hyde gently placed his brother on the floor and stood up. "That goes without saying. I'll kill the culprit with my own hands when I find them." He took a step forward and disappeared into the prison's depths. The Empyrean Circle members left the room and followed suit. Teakin sat next to Emery's body with his hands pressed together. The sword case strapped to his back rattled, and the lid burst open. Numerous swords flew out the door and into the depths. A prisoner covered in blood was killing to his heart's content when he bumped into a young man. He changed his target and lunged for him. "Don't blame me," the prisoner said. "You should have watched where you were going." The young man he'd bumped into was Jace Sinclair, a member of the Empyrean Circle. He stayed where he was and released his aura. A gust of wind swept through the corridor. The prisoner was astonished. The aura belonged to a divine Grand Master. The man looked young, but his cultivation was already this profound. The prisoner subconsciously slowed his movements, but it was too late to stop. Jace stood there and allowed the prisoner's attack to land. The dull sound of metal hitting metal bounced off the walls. He had to take a step back to steady himself from the impact, but he wasn't harmed. He used the momentum to counterattack. Blood spurted from the prisoner's neck as his headless corpse fell to the ground. He had been at the peak of the martial Grandmaster realm, but one hit from Jace had the strength to split mountains. On the other side, Hyde wielded his spear and knocked down the 8 prisoners that had surrounded him. The prisoners cried out in pain. Some of them had their limbs severed. Hyde didn't hold back. He was ruthless because of Emery's death. An elderly man approached from the end of the corridor. "Is that you, Hyde? Why are you bullying these weaklings? Fight me instead." Hyde looked over and froze. Gideon was a dangerous criminal. When he was captured, their martial arts had been similar. Over 100 years had passed, and Gideon's martial arts had no doubt improved. Hyde didn't hesitate to make the first move. When Gideon announced his arrival, there had been a distance of a few hundred feet between them, but they closed the distance in an instant as they leaped into action. Blood-red silk threads were wrapped around Gideon's hands. They deflected Hyde's spear, as if they were made of iron. As the fight progressed, Hyde couldn't gain the advantage even after unleashing most of his martial arts and pushing his cultivation to the limit. Gideon's cultivation was unfathomable. He was easily blocking his attacks. Hyde had a feeling that Gideon wasn't using his full strength. He stopped his relentless attacks and composed himself, returning to the same calm state of mind before he'd watched Emery die right in front of him. Hyde swung his spear, forcing Gideon to leap back. He seized the opportunity to infuse his inner energy into his weapon. The shadow of a serpent materialized and coiled around it. He thrust out his spear, aiming for Gideon's neck. This was the strongest skill, and no one had ever been able to take his attack directly. Gideon's casual demeanor was replaced by surprise. After being imprisoned for over 100 years, he was only a step away from the immortal realm. Hyde was one of his old opponents from the past, and he was still stuck at the peak of the Divine Grandmaster realm. Gideon had been planning to toy with Hyde, so he hadn't been taking the fight seriously. He wasn't prepared for Hyde's destructive skill. He was caught off guard, but only for a moment. After all, he was a martial artist who'd cultivated the dark arts for many years. Gideon placed his palms together and concentrated. His silk threads expanded and crashed into the serpent. An unpleasant, ear-piercing sound rang out, causing the weaker prisoners nearby to lose consciousness. Hyde didn't back down. He infused more of his inner energy into his spear. The phantom of the serpent came to life and let out a screech that knocked many of the remaining prisoners unconscious. This included martial grandmasters. Gideon smiled maniacally. Hyde, don't think you've won. He grabbed the serpent's head with both hands. The phantom's energy flared, and gashes ran up his arms at the contact. The blood from his wounds pooled in the air and rose with the wind. In a few short seconds, a wave of blood loomed overhead. Hyde was stunned. His serpent had only partially manifested, but Gideon's sea of blood had completely materialized into reality. Divine Grandmasters possess the ability to move their spiritual will and alter the world's natural phenomena to manifest phantoms. Augmentation of the phenomena trivialized martial arts of those in lower realms. Divine Grandmasters were few in number, but there had been a handful of martial artists who'd attained this realm since ancient times. The 10 members of the Empyrean Circle, Hyde, and Tegan had all reached the Divine Grandmaster realm. The realm above a Divine Grandmaster was the final realm. It was known as the Immortal Realm. Upon reaching this stage, one's lifespan could be expended to more than 1,000 years, which was 3 times longer than a Divine Grandmaster. The final realm was difficult to obtain, and no martial artist had ever been known to have reached that realm. When Vito was defeated, the Leviathan unit speculated that he was a half step away from the Immortal Realm. Divine Grandmasters who were close to reaching the Immortal Realm were rare and rumored to be walking nuclear bombs. Hyde had predicted that Gideon's cultivation had improved since the last time they'd fought each other, but he hadn't expected for him to have progressed this much. A clear sign that a martial artist was close to reaching the Immortal Realm was their ability to conjure a complete manifestation of reality. Hyde's serpent was vivid and lifelike, but it was incomplete. This was as far as he could go with the cultivation of a peak Divine Grandmaster. Gideon's sea of blood faltered momentarily. It seemed like this was his first time manifesting phenomena into reality, but there was no doubt that his cultivation was close to the Immortal Realm. Hyde's serpent crashed into the sea of blood. The waves parted, but it reformed in the next instant. As the minutes passed, the stalemate continued, but it was clear that Hyde was at a disadvantage. This was Gideon's first time using his martial arts after his cultivation improved, so his manifestation wasn't perfect. Otherwise, his sea of blood would have swallowed the serpent whole the second they came into contact. Hyde held his spear firmly, struggling to maintain his skill. The sea of blood threatened to overwhelm him. Blood flowed down Gideon's arms, dripping onto Hyde's spear. He was impressed with his own cultivation. The difference between a peak Divine Grandmaster and being half a step away from reaching the Immortal Realm was insurmountable. Hyde's uniform was in tatters from coming into contact with Gideon's manifestation. The material was expensive, and it provided a layer of defense, but it was useless against the sea of blood. "What do you think? Are you impressed?" Gideon taunted. Hyde saw through his tricks and ignored him. As Gideon's oldest rival, he knew what he was up to. He wouldn't let himself be distracted by his provocations. Gideon had been imprisoned for over a century, and he wanted to get a rise out of his rival. He was annoyed when Hyde didn't respond, so he tried a different tactic. "How did the Leviathan unit convince you to work for them? What benefits did they promise you?" Why are you putting your life on the line for them? If you join us, we can give you a share of the United States' territory." Hyde wasn't deterred. "I'm not risking my life for the Leviathan unit. I'm doing this for the country. I suggest you stop wasting your energy trying to convince me." Gideon shook his head in disappointment. His silk threads expanded and intertwined with the sea of blood into a two-headed snake. "I'll give you one more chance. Submit to me or die." "I'll never submit to you," Hyde said through clenched teeth. "Then die." The sea of blood coordinated with the two-headed snake and coiled around the serpent. It squeezed tightly, and the serpent burst into particles of light. The explosion sent Hyde crashing into the wall. The ceiling collapsed and buried him in the rubble. The surrounding prisoners were beginning to regain consciousness. They flattered Gideon when they saw him defeat Hyde and considered him their leader. Gideon enjoyed the compliments, but he had a reputation to maintain, so he scoffed and said, "Don't waste time and hang around. If you've killed enough, then get out of here." Emery, Hyde, and Tegan were part of a unit that consisted of 7 people. Their team was called the Cepheus subunit. Hyde was ranked 6th, while Tegan was the leader of the team. If Tegan and the Leviathan unit were here, Gideon might not have been able to leave so easily today. Because of how fast they'd exchanged blows, Gideon and Hyde's fight had taken less than 2 minutes. As soon as Gideon was finished, he transmitted his voice to his inmates. "Enzo, Bennett, are you done? I dealt with Hyde. It's time for us to leave." "I'll be there soon," Enzo replied. "Wait, I need 1 more minute," Bennett said. He sounded like he was caught up in an intense battle. "Let me finish off this brat first." "Hurry up. We shouldn't stay for too long." Gideon ended the communication and waved his hand, sweeping the rubble aside. Hyde was leaning against the wall, covered in wounds and panting heavily. His broken spear laid next to him. It had been with him for more than half of his life. Gideon couldn't stop himself from grinning. Before he met the man in the black robe, he had lost hope of ever getting out many years ago. But now he'd regained his freedom. His martial arts were stronger than ever, and he'd even defeated his old rival. His life had taken a drastic turn after that one chance encounter. When the 3 members of the Empyrean Circle ventured deeper into the prison, they split up to cover more ground. Trey had been sweeping through the prisoners like a walk in the park and reached the depths in no time at all. He'd incapacitated martial grandmasters with relative ease. Instead of killing them, he'd injured their legs to prevent them from escaping. The culprit who instigated the riot hadn't been found yet. Trey had kept the prisoners he'd encountered alive, so he could interrogate them. He stared down at the crowd with a chilling gaze. "I'll spare whoever reveals the identity of the culprit who destroyed the array and let the prisoners out." The prisoners were too afraid to look him in the eye. The young man had appeared to be innocent and harmless when they ran into him, but one wave of his hand had knocked a martial grandmaster unconscious. One prisoner swallowed nervously. It was so quiet that even the sound of him swallowing echoed through the corridor. The color drained from his face when the young man glanced in his direction. The prisoner squeezed his eyes shut and cursed inwardly. Why did he have to choose that moment to swallow? This was it for him. He kept his eyes closed for several minutes as he waited for death, but the pain didn't come. He cautiously opened his eyes and saw the young man frowning. The young man had casually taken down a horde of prisoners with a smile on his face. The prisoner couldn't understand why he suddenly looked so serious. Trey took on an offensive stance. "I know you're there. Come out." The prisoners followed his gaze down the corridor, but they didn't see anyone there. It was a dead end. For a second, they wondered if the young man was mentally sane. Maybe they had a chance of escaping. After 5 seconds of silence, a voice sounded from the darkness. "It's been decades since I met a martial artist so young and talented." The prisoners were dumbfounded when a tall man stepped out of the shadows. He was toned and muscular. A large, sharpened metal pipe was in his right hand. The man walked up to Trey without a trace of caution. Trey recognized him. He'd flipped through the profiles of every prisoner before he was stationed here. The man in front of him was Bennett. He had been at the peak of the Divine Grandmaster realm when he was imprisoned. Trey was in the same realm, but he wasn't as experienced. It wouldn't be an easy fight. "Young man, who are you?" Bennett asked. "Your cultivation is impressive for someone so young. Are you the sovereign the guards keep rambling about?" Trey was aware that he was at a disadvantage, but he refused to show any signs of weakness. "The sovereign is much stronger than me. I'm Trey Rivera, a member of the Empyrean Circle." Bennett's interest waned. Empyrean Circle? Never heard of them. He had a hobby of challenging skilled martial artists and wiping the floor with them. After breaking out of his cell, he went on to kill the armed guards stationed at the prison. Some of them had mentioned that the sovereign was the strongest martial artist in the country. He had been looking forward to fighting him. Bennett had sensed Trey's profound cultivation and mistook him for the sovereign. A young martial artist with this level of cultivation had much more potential than Emery, who was at an advanced age. It was reasonable for Trey to be the sovereign, so Bennett was disappointed when he found out he wasn't him. But it didn't make a difference. He couldn't fight the sovereign, but killing Trey would be an entertaining alternative. Bennett dragged the metal pipe on the ground as he approached Trey. Sparks flew as the pipe left behind a trail. "You might not be the sovereign, but we could still fight." "If you surrender, the Leviathan unit might reduce the severity of your crime," Trey warned. If they fought, the battle would be time-consuming. It would make his life easier if Bennett surrendered. But Bennett's pace didn't change. He continued to walk steadily toward him. A crazed look crossed his face. "Killing a martial artist like you will be the most fun I've had in years." Bennett had made it clear that he would not be backing down, so Trey drew his sword. A stream of water swirled around the blade. He brandished his weapon and lunged for Bennett. Bennett's smile widened. His right hand moved as fast as lightning. When he swung the pipe, the friction made a deep impression on the ground. The second their weapons clashed, a shockwave rippled across the corridor. Most of the prisoners were knocked unconscious. "Not bad," Bennett said. The metal pipe had slipped from his grasp and clattered to the ground. Trey circulated his inner energy and attacked again with double the force. "Interesting technique," Bennett commented before counterattacking. The two of them had exchanged hundreds of blows in the span of a few seconds. As the fight dragged on, Trey found himself being pushed back. His technique increased the amount of force each slash contained every time he attacked. He'd barely managed to increase his strength to 10 times that of a normal peak Divine Grandmaster, but it hadn't affected Bennett at all. Trey couldn't understand how Bennett was able to fight on par with him with only brute strength. Before meeting Steven, he hadn't had much contact with the outside world. But after he joined the Empyrean Circle, he'd had many interactions with his peers and gained a general understanding of their martial arts. Along with Steven's teachings, his martial arts had improved significantly. Bennett had been imprisoned for decades, and he hadn't experienced a real battle in a long time. But he was strong enough to tie with Trey without using his full strength. According to the prisoners' profiles, there were 2 other inmates who were on the same level as Bennett. Trey's group consisted of 4 martial artists at the peak of the Divine Grandmaster realm, and 1 martial artist close to the Immortal realm. The prisoners outnumbered them, but if Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett weren't in the picture, they would have only needed 1 person on their team to suppress the riot. If the 3 notorious criminals had attacked together, Trey would have been killed instantly. Perhaps his teammates had already run into Enzo or Gideon. It would be a disaster if the 3 of them joined hands. Trey had to keep Bennett occupied until reinforcements arrived. Bennett noticed the resolve on Trey's face. "Are you going to fight with your life on the line?" Bennett hadn't been taking the fight seriously. He'd been toying with Trey. He was planning on draining his energy before killing him off. The look of despair on his opponent's face right before they died was the highlight of every battle. "If you're willing to throw away your own life, then use your strongest technique. I won't stop you." Trey had no intention of listening to him. Playing by the enemy's rules was a death sentence. His strongest technique had to be used at the right moment. He continued to attack Bennett with the same momentum as before. Bennett was getting impatient. He unleashed his aura and grabbed the metal pipe. He swung with so much force that it created a vacuum of air. The prisoners who were still conscious were nervous for Trey, even though they were on opposing sides. They were a good distance away from the fight, but they were still affected by the aftershocks of Bennett's attack. They couldn't imagine how much pressure Trey was experiencing. Their eyes were wide with horror as the metal pipe came down on him. They'd steeled themselves for a gruesome aftermath. Trey was from the Oceanic clan, and he had been cultivating his martial arts since he was young. He had a deep affinity for water, and he could control it at will. Bennett's attack was fast and destructive, but it was nothing a member of the Oceanic clan couldn't handle. Trey's movements were as fluid as water as he stepped out of range. The moment Bennett struck the ground, the force triggered an earthquake that shook the entire building. The prisoners' floors had been reinforced with a material that was sturdier than steel. Ordinary martial artists wouldn't have been able to even scratch the surface, but Bennett had cracked the floor. Bennett's attack was powerful, but after it landed, there was a short period where he had to maneuver back into his original stance. Trey took advantage of the opening and unleashed his strongest skill. A stream of water swirled around him. It pulsed and rippled into a river, a lake, and then an ocean. The waves spun into a tornado of water. The surrounding prisoners scrambled to escape, but they were swept into the torrent and disappeared. Even martial grandmasters couldn't resist the waves with how fast it spun. Their bodies were torn apart, and not even their bones remained. Trey was confident in his skill, but the calm look on Bennett's face made him uneasy. "Finally, you're forcing me to use both of my hands." That was when Trey realized that during their entire fight, Bennett had been holding the metal pipe in his right hand. Theoretically, attacking with both hands holding a weapon was 4 times stronger than if only one hand was used. When Bennett pulled the metal pipe out of the ground with both hands, 49 illusory skulls manifested behind him. Each skull gave off a powerful aura. Most of the auras were at the same intensity as the peak martial grandmaster, while 3 of the auras matched a divine grandmaster. Bennett licked his lips. There was a faraway look in his eyes as he reminisced about the past. "These are the skulls of my favorite opponents. I remember every martial artist I've killed, but not all of their skulls are worth keeping. Your skull will be my 4th divine grandmaster." Bennett spread his hands. The skulls rattled, emitting an eerie glow and casting shadows across the walls. Trey had experienced multiple battles since he joined the Empyrean Circle, but this was the first time he'd been this unnerved by his opponent. Madman. This was his evaluation of Bennett. Who in their right mind would bring the skulls of their opponents they'd killed and manifest them whenever they wanted? He was a maniac through and through. The skulls contained the resentment and grudges of the deceased. Keeping them with him would eventually alter his state of mind and drive him crazy. But Trey didn't have time to contemplate the repercussions of collecting skulls. He concentrated on his raging storm. While the basis of his technique was water, it could naturally generate electrical energy. Lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled amidst the waves. The torrent of water swept through the corridor. When it reached Bennett, the 49 skulls fused together into a massive skull. It opened its mouth and swallowed the tornado in one gulp. Bennett didn't miss a beat as the water vanished. He brandished his weapon and charged at Trey. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. The instant Trey's ultimate technique failed, despair would be etched into his features. Trey saw him coming and raised his sword. He now understood how his technique had been overpowered so easily. Bennett wasn't a divine grandmaster anymore. His cultivation was half a step away from the immortal realm. His Phantom of Skulls was a physical entity. Trey's storm was vast and boundless, but it was an incomplete manifestation. No matter how close it was to materializing, it would never be real. Bennett was also rushing at him in what appeared to be a simple attack, but it most likely contained a force that was the equivalent to collective auras of his skulls. If Trey was hit directly, even his uniform's defensive properties wouldn't be enough to block it. He would be killed on the spot. Thinking fast, Trey utilized his affinity for water and became one with the element. He'd never attempted a technique like this before, but he managed to slip out of range and avoid the attack by a hair. In the next second, the massive skull crashed down on the ground where he'd just been standing. Trey had avoided the impact, but the resulting shockwave slammed into him and almost knocked him off his feet. He skidded across the corridor until his back collided with the wall. 2 trails had been left on the ground when Trey was pushed back. With one strike, Bennett had knocked him almost 600 feet away. Bennett was genuinely surprised that Trey had survived. He'd hidden his strength when he attacked and planned to kill him at the last moment to witness his despair, but Trey had seen through him and got away with a light injury instead. Trey's eyes narrowed. "You're not a peak divine grandmaster. You're almost at the immortal realm." Bennett grinned. "You have a good eye." He didn't bother hiding his true strength anymore. The full intensity of his aura came forth. He was more than 10 times stronger than before and far more powerful than Trey. Trey's expression darkened. He absolutely couldn't let him get out of here. If Bennett escaped and hid his aura to blend in with the crowd, there was no telling how much destruction and bloodshed he would cause before he got caught. Trey had secretly activated an emergency communication device to alert his companions during the fight. They would be here any minute now. "Even if the rest of the prisoners get out, I'll make sure you stay in here for the rest of your life." "Do you think you're capable of that?" Bennett challenged. "I won't know until I try," Trey said. He was attempting to stall for time. His heart pounded as he willed his companions to hurry up. Bennett's aura hadn't weakened in the slightest, but Trey had been injured. It wasn't serious, but his overall strength had decreased by around 20%. If he exchanged another blow with Bennett alone, he would be killed without fail. An anxious voice came through the communication device. "Hello, Trey? Where are you?" Trey was relieved to hear his companion's voice. He warily kept an eye on Bennett as he answered. "Jace, I need backup." Bennett was as carefree as ever. He watched in amusement. "Are you waiting for your friend?" "And if I am," Trey replied. "Don't get your hopes up," Bennett said. "They won't be coming." At the same time, Jace spoke again. "Trey, retreat immediately. All three of them are half a step away from the immortal realm." Bennett and Jay's voices overlapped and echoed in Trey's ears. He didn't need to be told twice. Without wasting a second, he used the same movement technique as before and ran down the corridor. If Enzo and Gideon were peak divine grandmasters, Trey's group would have still had a shot at restraining them. But if all three of them were like Bennett, they would be slaughtered without a doubt. The 10 members of the Empyrean Circle were prepared to sacrifice themselves for the country, but that didn't entail throwing themselves into a meaningless death. Trey's best option was to regroup with his companions and hope that reinforcements from the Leviathan unit had arrived. When the array was destroyed, Trey's group had sent a message to the higher-ups of the Leviathan unit. Then they'd made their way to the core of the array. The entire process had only taken 3 minutes. With the Leviathan unit's reaction speed, the martial artists listed on the combat sovereignty rankings and the special forces station not too far away would rush over once they were notified. The other members of the Cepheus subunit and the Empyrean Circle who hadn't left on their individual missions would also arrive soon. The reinforcements would be enough to hold Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett back. The Leviathan unit had learned their lesson after Vito's second rebellion. They'd devised a backup plan to ensure that they could handle martial artists at his level in case one of them showed up again. Their new trump cards were the Cepheus subunit and the Empyrean Circle. They believed that if Vito were alive, he wouldn't have been a match for them if they joined forces. Bennett licked his lips, eyes wide in exhilaration. Trying to run? It won't be that easy. He lifted the metal pipe with his inner energy. Just as he was about to take aim at Trey, Gideon's voice echoed in his ears. "Enzo, Bennett, are you done? I dealt with Hyde. It's time for us to leave." "Wait, I need 1 more minute," Bennett said. "Let me finish off this brat first." During their short conversation, Trey had already put a distance of 1 mile between them. He was using a strange movement technique that Bennett wasn't familiar with. He estimated that it would take him 1 minute to catch up and finish him off. Bennett stepped forward and disappeared down the corridor, chasing after Trey. The two of them quickly left to the depths of the prison. Trey had sustained a minor injury. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but it affected his coordination and slowed him down. There was a slight delay whenever he circulated his technique. Minor injuries like this usually healed within a few minutes, but escaping from a martial artist who was almost at the immortal realm wasn't easy. One slip-up was all it would take for Bennett to catch up. The exertion required to maintain his speed prevented his injury from healing. Trey weaved through crowds of prisoners as he ran, while Bennett forced his way through. Anyone who got in his way was torn apart by the 49 skulls. The prisoners' screams filled the corridor. Many of them were martial grandmasters, but they were killed instantly when Bennett passed. As they turned the corner, Bennett grabbed one of the skulls and threw it at Trey. "This ends here." Trey didn't answer. He used his movement technique to dodge to the right, but the skull's aura didn't disappear behind him. Instead, it felt closer than before. He glanced back and saw the skull heading straight for him. It had a tracking ability, and it was moving much faster than Bennett. The skull slammed into Trey's back with the force of a divine grandmaster. He crashed against the wall and fell to his knees, coughing up blood. Bennett slowed his pace and steadily approached, step by step. "Why aren't you running anymore?" Trey knew that resisting would be futile. "If you want to kill me, then do it. The Leviathan unit will definitely avenge me. If the Sovereign takes action, it'll be over for you three." Bennett let out a laugh. "Leviathan unit? How are they supposed to help you? There's no one among their ranks who can compare to us. As for the Sovereign, at most he's like us, half a step away from the immortal realm. If the three of us work together, we can take him down easily." Trey didn't respond. In reality, he didn't know how profound Stephen's martial arts were. He only knew that Stephen was much stronger than him, so there was a chance that Bennett was right. "After I kill you, I'll meet up with the others and get rid of the rest of your group. With you peak divine grandmasters, the only people left will be those soldiers. Their martial arts don't come close to ours. Who else can stop us?" Bennett smirked as he lifted the metal pipe in his hands. "Well, none of this has anything to do with you. You're going to die here. Don't worry, your companions will follow you soon." Trey closed his eyes, bracing himself for the impact. But before Bennett's attack could land, 4 swords flew down the corridor and clashed with the metal pipe. A shrill sound rang out as sparks flew. The loud noise jolted Trey from his despair. He opened his eyes and looked back. Those swords belonged to Tegan. Bennett clicked his tongue in annoyance. He recognized the sword's design. Tegan was interfering. The swords deflected Bennett's weapon and dove for his neck. He was forced to step back and put some distance between them. The swords hovered behind Trey, protecting him from any further attacks. On the other side of the prison, 3 swords appeared out of nowhere and blocked Gideon, who'd been planning to finish Hyde off. "Where are you, Tegan? Stop hiding and show yourself." Hyde looked up and saw the swords circling above. His brother was here to help him. When Gideon was distracted, a young man rushed at him from his blind spot with a destructive momentum. He was caught off guard and raised his arms to defend himself. He couldn't block the attack completely and was forced back. The swords didn't give him a chance to regain his balance and followed up with the young man's surprise attack. The young man hurried to Hyde's side. "We have to get out of here." Hyde was surprised to see him. "Jace? How did you know I was here? My brother's fending him off. I can't leave him alone." Jace was getting anxious. The swords wouldn't hold Gideon back for long. "Mr. Tegan's not here. He sent his swords to assist us." To his relief, Hyde gave in. "I see. All right, let's go." Jace put Hyde's arm around his shoulder and helped him up. "Hyde, where do you think you're going?" Gideon shouted when he saw them take off running. He was so close to finishing off his old rival for good and restoring his reputation. He couldn't let him get away. Using one hand to fend off the swords, Gideon threw out his other hand toward Hyde and Jace. His silk threads shot forward. Just as they were about to wrap around them and pull them back, one of the swords separated from the others and slashed the threads in half. Gideon cursed and used his other threads to fling the swords to the side. The swords alone wouldn't be able to land a scratch on him, but they were a hassle to deal with. By the time he got rid of them, Hyde and Jace would be long gone. He would have to waste even more time to search for them. "Consider yourselves lucky," Gideon spat. He retrieved his threads and ran in the opposite direction. The swords didn't stop him. They turned into streams of light and returned in the direction they came from. Tegan was sitting at the center of the room that used to contain the core of the array. He made a hand seal, pressing 2 fingers together and motioning to the case on his back. The 3 flying swords returned to his case, and a few seconds later, another 4 swords flew into the room and joined them. He exhaled slowly and opened his eyes. Gideon was muttering to himself in frustration as he ran down the corridor. When he was almost out of the depths, he contacted Enzo and Bennett. "Where are you two? It's time to leave." Enzo replied first. "I'm at the gate. Hurry up." "Don't rush me," Bennett snapped. He sounded annoyed. Half a minute later, the 3 of them met at the entrance of the prison. Gideon was in a bad mood. "I almost had him." Bennett was also displeased. "You're not the only one. Tegan ruined all my plans." "He got in your way?" Gideon asked in surprise. Bennett was too annoyed to explain, so he gave him a curt response. "I almost killed that brat, but Tegan's swords came out of nowhere and interfered." "Why? Did he stop you too?" Gideon snorted. "If we weren't pressed for time, I would have searched the prison for Tegan and killed him myself." "A setback is a setback. Don't bother coming up with excuses," Bennett retorted. "Watch it," Gideon warned. "Are you looking for a fight?" First, he'd been careless and sustained minor injuries when Hyde caught him off guard. Then, when he was about to finish Hyde off, some young man whose cultivation was inferior to his own had knocked him back. This was a heavy blow to Gideon's reputation. Bennett was obviously aware of this and was rubbing it in his face. As a martial artist who was close to reaching the immortal realm, he should have been able to wipe the floor with anyone with a lower cultivation. Bennett was also seething with anger. He had been so close to killing Trey, but he had to retreat when Tegan interfered. Gideon and Bennett glared at each other, itching to vent their frustrations. Before they could make a move, Enzo interrupted them. "That's enough. Our priority should be leaving the prison as soon as we can. I don't care if you two beat each other to death, but save it until we get out of here." It had been less than 10 minutes since the riots broke out. The Leviathan unit had most likely been notified, and reinforcements were heading their way. If the 3 of them didn't work together, it would be difficult to get out of here unscathed. Gideon and Bennett stared each other down for another tense minute. Then they scoffed and turned away. They knew Enzo was right. If they wanted to get out of here, they would need to join forces. Enzo gestured to the gate. "Why fight amongst ourselves when our punching bags are waiting for us beyond the gate? Let's wreak havoc." Gideon nodded and prepared his threads. "Just don't get in my way," Bennett said. He had every intention of venting his pent-up frustrations on the Leviathan unit's reinforcements. Armed soldiers were lying in ambush outside the prison. Helicopters circled the skies above. Cannons were aimed at the gates, and a large number of tanks were being transported over. Any prisoner who made it past the gate would be faced with a fierce bombardment. The temporary command station that had been set up at the last minute had been busy since the Leviathan unit notified them of the prison riots. A middle-aged man with 4 stars on his uniform was yelling into the phone, urging his subordinates to transfer more people to the prison. The man was the general in charge of Annapolis's defense, Gustav. When he received the news from the Leviathan unit, he'd led the military station near the city to lock down the area around the prison within a 10-mile radius. As a high-ranking military officer stationed in Annapolis, he was aware of what kind of criminals were detained in the 7 Stars prison. He grew nervous with every passing minute. He turned to his subordinates who were in charge of contacting the Leviathan unit. "Are they here yet?" Before they could reply, an elderly man walked over. "We'll fill in for them. It's our duty." Gustav turned around and was pleasantly surprised to see Kane, a member of the Cepheus subunit. He was with a young man from the Empyrean Circle. "Tegan and Hyde are already inside, suppressing the riot," Kane said. "Your mission is to monitor the situation from here. You don't have to worry about anything else." "Thank you, Mr. Kane and Mr. Yule," Gustav said. In front of a member of the Cepheus subunit and a member of the Empyrean Circle, he didn't look like a big shot in the military at all. The young man, Yule Everett, stepped forward. "There's no need to thank us. We'll all work for the country, so that makes us colleagues." Yule was humble and modest without a trace of arrogance. Gustav held a lot of respect for him, even though he was much younger. Jace, Trey, and Huey are inside with Mr. Tegan and Mr. Hyde, Yule explained. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about. And with me and Mr. Kane here, the prisoners will be brought back to their cells in no time. Yule carried himself in a confident and self-assured manner. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and steady. It had a calming effect on those conversing with him. He was dependable, and that made others want to place their trust in him. Gustav, who'd been feeling uneasy a moment ago, came back to his senses. You're right. With so many capable martial artists here, I shouldn't be wasting my time worrying. While they were talking, an emergency alarm sounded throughout the command center. Gustav's uneasiness returned. He had a bad feeling about all this. His subordinate came running. The prisoners are attempting to break down the gate. Gustav, Kane, and Yule were alarmed by the news. Kane shook his head in disbelief. Tegan, Hyde, and Emery are inside. How could the prisoners have gotten to the gate? Regardless of how they got through, they've reached the gate, Yule said. We have to stop them. Kane nodded and turned to Gustav. I'll leave things here to you. Yes, sir, Gustav said. As Yule and Kane made their way to the front lines, the army was preparing to fire the artillery. At the end of the 5-minute countdown, a large explosion rang out from the gate, and 3 men in prison uniforms stepped outside. At the same time, Gustav instructed the army to fire. A barrage of fiery bombardment rained down on the 3 prisoners. Gustav stared intently at the monitor as the explosions died down. The entrance to the prison was covered in smoke. He was doubtful that the regular weaponry would be effective against martial artists who were strong enough to reach the gate, but he had a sliver of hope that they'd been killed. His hopes were dashed when an amused laugh came from within the smoke. What a grand welcome! The soldiers nearby tightened their grips on their guns. The instant the smoke dispersed and 3 prisoners appeared, everyone's gazes trained on them. They were encased in a barrier of blood-red silk threads that came apart when the smoke settled. Kane couldn't believe it. They're half a step away from the immortal realm. Yule was prepared for unexpected situations, so he didn't lose his composure. Whatever their cultivation is, we have to stop them here. Annapolis is behind us. We can't let them escape. Kane suppressed his surprise. Right, now's not the time to be shocked. His gaze was sharp as he scrutinized the trio. He tossed a black and white chess piece into the air. It glowed and divided into streams of light that covered the sky. Kane calmed his mind and circulated his inner energy. The heavens make the chessboard, and the stars make the chess pieces. With his incantation, the streams of light connected to form a chessboard that blotted out the sun and dimmed the prison's vicinity. It disappeared in the next second, and the sky returned to normal. Are you all right? Yule asked worriedly. Kane looked worse for wear after casting his technique. Kane brushed off his concern. I'm fine. I've activated the chessboard. I'll leave the rest to you. This technique is the culmination of every formation I've designed in my long life. It has the ability to decrease our enemy's strength and increase our own. Those 3 are almost at the immortal realm. Under my technique's influence, their cultivation will drop significantly. You're a peak divine grandmaster, and with my technique, you won't be that far off from the immortal realm. Yule was intrigued. He'd never seen this technique in action before. Don't get overconfident, Kane warned. Even you have your limits. You may have gotten stronger, but your essence is still that of a peak divine grandmaster. This technique consumes a great deal of energy. I can't maintain it for long. Be careful. I understand, Yule said. Wait here. I'll go deal with them. As soon as he finished his sentence, he vanished in a flash of light and reappeared in front of Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett. You 3 aren't authorized to leave the prison. Please go back inside. Otherwise, I'll have to resort to force. Gideon held his hands behind his back, assuming a confident posture. If he weren't wearing a tattered prison uniform, he would have looked as imposing as he sounded. You are young and a talented martial artist. You have a bright future ahead of you. If you leave now, you can keep your life and train some more. Bennett didn't see eye to eye with Gideon, so he ignored his statement completely and provoked the young man instead. No matter how talented you are, you're like a kid in my eyes. Do you really think you're capable of going against your elders?" Bennett had been disappointed ever since Trey slipped from his grasp. Now that another young martial artist just like him had shown up, he was itching to kill him. Enzo ignored them both and asked, "What's your name?" Even though the three of them had worked together to break out of prison, each had their own agenda. Gideon and Bennett were battle-crazed and would end up fighting each other sooner or later. Before it came to that, Enzo had to ensure their escape. Judging from the densely packed armed forces, it was clear that it wouldn't be easy to get out of here. They had to get rid of the strongest martial artists first. After that, even an entire army wouldn't pose a threat to them. "I'm Yule Sterling, a member of the Empyrean Circle. If you three have no plans to head back inside, then I'll have to make you go back by force." Yule took the initiative to attack. His first target was Gideon. Gideon frowned. This was the third time he'd been provoked by an opponent who was weaker than him. He was getting old, but retained his temperamental personality from his youth. "You're getting ahead of yourself. First it was Hyde, then it was that young man named Jace, and now it's you. Do you really think I'm that easy of a target?" His silk threads unraveled like boneless snakes and turned into pythons. He'd only used 2 of them during his fight with Hyde, but now their numbers had almost reached 100. "You should be honored to die after experiencing this technique. I don't use it against just anyone." Gideon's pythons released an aura that swept over the clearing. Yule couldn't block it completely and took quite a bit of damage, but he didn't panic. He'd trained a martial arts technique of the Earth attribute that provided him with an endless supply of inner energy if he remained in contact with the Earth. He could recover from most injuries within a few seconds. Because of his resilient and sturdy body, he was ranked second in the Imperial Circle. Yule unleashed his aura. It contained a pressure that weighed down the air with a few 100-feet radius. An illusory mountain covered the sky and crashed down on the pythons. They were hundreds of feet long, but they were nothing but a speck of dust in the face of a 30,000 feet tall mountain. The pythons were flattened the second they came in contact with Yule's manifestation. Gideon was infuriated. A manifestation from a divine grandmaster was incomplete, but it could never withstand a real manifestation. The pythons had materialized into reality, but they had been crushed by Yule's manifestation, which could only mean one thing. "Are you close to the immortal realm?" Yule smiled cryptically. "Why don't you take a guess?" He didn't wait for a response. A mountain created from inner energy couldn't compare to the real thing, but it possessed 1,000th of its real weight. It crashed down on the 3 prisoners with a mass of millions of tons at high speed. The resulting impact would be similar to a nuclear explosion. This was the main reason why martial artists close to the immortal realm were called walking nuclear weapons. They could annihilate a city with the snap of their fingers. Gideon had lost the best opportunity to counterattack because of how stunned he'd been when he discovered that Yule's cultivation was similar to his own. If he took the hit directly, he wouldn't die, but it would leave him in a sorry state. He kept his gaze on the mountain that was only a few seconds away from flattening him and yelled at his fellow inmates. His voice held a trace of panic. "Don't just stand there and watch. Do you want to be killed by some kid?" Bennett felt immense satisfaction at the thought of Gideon's mangled body. He would have been all for it if it weren't for the fact that Yule's manifestation covered a wide range, and he was also caught in the attack. "You're the one who's afraid. That can't do anything to me." He casually tossed the metal pipe aside and threw out his hands towards the mountain. The 49 skulls appeared behind him. Their auras were much stronger compared to when he fought Trey. The skulls glowed, and their shape distorted. They coalesced into a beam of black light over 300 feet long and collided with Yule's manifestation. A dull sound of a blunt force collision echoed in the sky. The beam of light and the mountain were locked in a stalemate. At the command center, Gustav had recovered from a shock at the intensity of the battle and hurriedly snatched the communication device from his subordinates. "What are you all waiting for? Support Mr. Yule immediately!" It was clear that Yule and the prisoners were in a deadlock, and the battle had reached a critical moment. Kane was spent after activating his technique, and there was no one left to assist Yule except the army. If they didn't make a move now, they might lose the opportunity to gain the upper hand altogether. At Gustav's command, the armed forces didn't hold back. Another round of gunfire shot toward the prisoners. The armed personnel present were elites of the special forces. Their aim was accurate and precise. Every bullet targeted the prisoners' vital points. Gideon was growing increasingly annoyed. Now it was the army provoking him. They were launching a surprise attack while Yule and Bennett were preoccupied. He might have been careless once or twice, but firearms were easy to handle. Gideon held out his hands. The pythons that had been crushed were revived one after another and blocked the gunfire. Gustav instructed the army to keep firing and draw the prisoners' attention. Gideon's patience had reached its limit. He'd never been this looked down upon in his entire life. He pressed his palms together, and the pythons merged into a massive beast. When it swept its tail, the tanks were reduced to scrap metal, and the armed forces who didn't have time to retreat were torn apart. With one strike, there were hundreds of casualties. Yule frowned as his gaze swept over the destruction. Your opponent is me. Don't drag them into this. With his free hand, Yule threw out a wave of energy toward Gideon. Bennett was also using one hand to fight. He raised his right hand and extinguished the wave of energy. Forget about him. Focus on your fight with me. Yule's expression darkened. I'll deal with you first and then get rid of him. He pressed his palms together, and his energy began to fluctuate from within. The ground shook, and those who'd reached a certain level of cultivation could feel an enormous amount of energy from the ground condensing to a point in Yule's core. You forced me to use this technique, so don't blame me if you die. Yule's aura surged, and the mountain reverted to its illusory state. In a few seconds, it solidified once more and shrank into a 3,000 feet tall mountain. It was significantly smaller in size, but its aura was 10 times stronger than its previous entity. Bennett's confident expression faltered for the first time since he'd broken out of his cell. Yule's martial arts were beyond his imagination. Yule's technique was on par with Bennett's strongest attack. There was no time to avoid it. If Bennett tried to defend himself and took the attack directly, he would sustain severe injuries to the point of near death. But if he attempted to dodge, he would be killed without a doubt. Those were the only two options, but Bennett wasn't one to give up so easily. He laughed maniacally as he threw out his hands. The beam of light dissipated and turned back into 49 skulls. This time, numerous smaller skulls trailed behind them, like soldiers being led by a general, forming an army of the dead. The skulls fused into a massive skeletal blade at least 300 feet in length. It was covered in black flames. Bennett grabbed the hilt with both hands and swung at Yule's manifestation. The impact shook the earth. At the center of the collision, smoke billowed, and shockwaves tore through the area. This destruction was expected from a battle between two martial artists close to the immortal realm. It was only at this stage that one could be called a true martial artist. The mountain crumbled, and the full force of the explosion slammed into Yule, knocking him back almost half a mile away from the center of the collision. His right arm twisted unnaturally, and every movement sent a sharp pain through his body. Gustav rushed out of the command center to steady him. Yule waved him away and circulated his energy to speed up the healing process. I'm fine. Warn the army to be on alert. Are those prisoners still alive? Gustav asked in astonishment. How could someone survive a nuclear explosion? As a general responsible for Annapolis's defense, he'd seen many skilled martial artists in his life. Even the soldiers listed on the combat sovereignty rankings weren't immune to firearms. They're stronger than me. 2 of them weren't at the center of the explosion, so they most likely weren't harmed. Yule stared at Gustav where he stood frozen in place. What are you waiting for? Pass on my message. Gustav snapped out of it and hurriedly took out his communication device. A voice called out to Yule from within the cloud of smoke. I suggest you stop here if you value your life. A gust of wind dispersed the haze. Enzo was standing in front of Bennett and Gideon. Bennett's prisoner uniform was in tatters, and gashes littered his skin. There were only 36 skulls left behind him. 13 of them had disappeared forever. I've never seen a martial artist like you. It's safe to say that you're the strongest in the country. Unfortunately, that ends now. Enzo reached into his pocket and pulled out a broken sword that was wrapped in the remnants of a familiar white uniform. Yule's eyes widened in disbelief. You said you were a part of the Empyrean Circle, right? I've already killed one of them. His body is inside the prison. Enzo tossed the sword in Yule's direction. It clattered to the ground with a clang. A breeze swept the tattered uniform away from the sword, revealing the name engraved on the hilt, Huey Sterling. He was a member of the Empyrean Circle, and he had been guarding the prison with Jason Trey. When the Empyrean Circle first appeared, the Leviathan unit had ordered the production of a unique sword forged from precious resources. It was inferior to the Sovereign's Imperial sword, but it was a priceless treasure that was linked to its owner's life force. The owner's name was engraved on the hilt. The sword shared the same fate as its owner. If the sword was broken, then its owner had met their end. Seeing that Yule was too stunned over his friend's death to reply, Enzo went on. His martial arts weren't that bad. He was skilled with the sword, but it's a shame he ran into me. I'm not like those two weaklings behind me. I'm far closer to the immortal realm than them. If they're half a step away, then I'm only a hair's breadth away. I'm practically at the final realm already. Everyone present couldn't believe what they were hearing. There were rumors that the Sovereign's cultivation was so close to the immortal realm that he must have already broken through to the initial stages of the final realm. Aside from him, only the leader of the Cepheus subunit, Tegan, and the Empyrean Circle members ranked first were close to reaching the immortal realm. The rest of them were only peak divine grandmasters. With Enzo's cultivation, Yule couldn't take him down alone. He would need assistance from all the Imperial Circle and Cepheus subunit members stationed at the prison. His cultivation had increased with Kane's technique, but it would return to its original state after the technique was deactivated. But Huey had been killed. Even if they combined their strengths, they probably only would be able to fight on par with Enzo. Yule didn't know that Emery had also been killed, so their chances of getting out of this alive were actually much more slim than he'd predicted. A wave of despair washed over the armed forces. It was hard enough to protect themselves. Preventing the 3 prisoners from escaping was an impossible task. Your martial arts are impressive, Enzo said. You have a choice. Surrender now or die by my hand. Yule stood up from where he was crouching. His injuries had already healed. I'm a member of the Empyrean Circle. My duty is to protect the country. I won't hesitate to sacrifice my life. Enzo let out a sigh, having already guessed his answer. Then go accompany your friend in the afterlife. Enzo lifted his hand, condensing his inner energy. A dark aura surged around him. Yule activated the same technique he'd used against Bennett and lunged for him. Enzo shattered his manifestation with his fist and landed a direct hit on Yule's arms. His flesh was torn, leaving only ghastly white bones behind. Martial artists who practiced techniques of the Earth attribute were well known for their heightened defenses, but even Yule was no match for a martial artist who was only a sliver away from the immortal realm. He crashed into a pile of rubble a mile away. No one knew if he was alive or dead. Gustav was filled with grief and indignation. He grabbed his spear and charged at Enzo, instructing the armed forces to follow his lead. Gustav was their superior, and any soldier under his command was duty-bound to follow him onto the battlefield. Gideon had been itching to recover his lost dignity. When the army charged at him with no regard for their own lives, he knew this was his opportunity to start a massacre. His cultivation base would improve with every subsequent martial artist he killed. Even the weakest soldier had some level of martial arts training. They were more valuable than ordinary citizens. Before both sides could clash, Enzo held out his hands in opposite directions. He sent a wave of energy towards Gideon, knocking him off his feet, and formed an invisible wall to prevent the armed forces from getting close. Gideon wasn't expecting his fellow inmate to attack him, so he was caught off guard for the 4th time that day and crawled to his feet, utterly humiliated. Enzo, what the hell are you doing? This was a crucial moment. He couldn't understand why Enzo had protected the army and attacked him. Bennett had always thought Gideon was unpleasant and an eyesore. When he saw him being humiliated, he naturally took pleasure in his misfortune and couldn't pass up on the chance to mock him. Looks like someone's having a bad day. The two of them had only just found out about Enzo's cultivation, so they were forced to restrain themselves. They could only attack each other with verbal insults. If Enzo weren't there, Gideon would have already ignored the armed force's existence and engaged in a full-blown brawl with Bennett because of that sarcastic remark alone. "I have something to ask them," Enzo said. He spoke calmly, but there was a hint of warning in his tone. "No one is allowed to interfere." "Fine, go ahead." Gideon was prideful, and he refused to admit that he was at a disadvantage, but Enzo didn't mind as long as he stayed put. A short distance away, Gustav and his armed forces were blocked by an invisible wall of air. It had been created from Enzo's aura. None of them could get through the blockade. Gustav refused to back down. "You can do whatever you want to us, but we won't betray the country." Enzo ignored his hostility, but he was getting impatient. "I'm not asking you to betray the country. I only have one question for you. Do you know where Titus Ward is?" The moment the question left his mouth, the air froze. It was like a bomb had been stopped right before it exploded. Even Gideon and Bennett had to take a step back. In that instant, they saw Enzo was a threat. It wasn't the terror that came from a predator about to kill their prey. It was an instinctive fear that originated from the biological chain. Whoever provoked Enzo at this moment would be killed mercilessly. This was a consensus that everyone present had reached, including Gustav and his armed forces. After a minute, Gustav shook off the pressure and answered his question. "I've never heard of anyone with that name." He had been expecting Enzo to interrogate him about the country's secrets. He never thought he'd ask about someone's whereabouts instead. "If you don't know, then you're useless." There was a glint in Enzo's eyes, and then Gustav dissolved in a rain of blood. The army watched in horror. Enzo hadn't moved an inch, but he'd somehow killed their superior in such a cruel way. "I'll ask you one more time. Where is Titus Ward? If you can't answer, then all of you will end up like him." Faced with the threat of a cruel death, the army divided into two groups. One group was desperate to survive. They put their heads together and racked their brains to figure out who this Titus Ward was. "Calm down and think. Maybe we still have a chance. Has anyone heard of someone with that name?" "I have no impression." The other group would rather die than submit. One of the colonels held his head high and declared, "Mr. Gustav has treated me well all these years. He was my mentor back when I first joined the army, and he was the one who promoted me to the special forces. I'm not strong enough to avenge him, but I won't sully his name. I'll repay him with my death." Many of the soldiers shared the same sentiments. Gustav's martial arts were average, but he had an eye for talent. His subordinates were thankful to him, so they were indignant when he was killed so ruthlessly. "You don't have an answer? Then all of you can follow in your superior's footsteps." Enzo raised his hand, and the sky darkened. The army looked up and saw a massive shadow of a demonic being hovering right above them. It lifted its leg, preparing to trample them flat. Most of the armed forces lost hope and gave up resisting. Some tried to save themselves, while others fired their weapons. Nothing worked. As the demonic being approached, everyone closed their eyes and waited for death. Suddenly, a shrill sound reverberated through the air. They opened their eyes and bore witness to an unbelievable miracle. 7 swords circled the skies above, forming an array that forced the demonic being back. The array was much smaller in size compared to Enzo's manifestation, but it held considerable strength. The demonic being couldn't get past. Gideon recognized the swords. His anger flared. Tegan had already gotten in his way once today. This was his chance to get back at him. Bennett had always been at odds with Gideon, but for once they had the same goal. He could have killed Trey, but he hadn't gotten away because Tegan's swords had interfered. Gideon's silk threads transformed into pythons. "Show yourself, Tegan!" Bennett assembled his skulls and surveyed his surroundings, searching for any sign of Tegan. "Has the leader of the Cepheus subunit always been a coward? Are you only capable of launching sneak attacks?" A cold voice sounded from within the prison. "You two aren't enough to make him fight you directly. Two figures dashed out of the ruined entrance and crossed the distance in a split second. Their fists slammed into Gideon and Bennett's chests. Much to their frustration, the two of them were forced to retreat. Compared to the prisoners, the armed forces, who had narrowly escaped death, cheered their allies on. They were too shocked for words when they first saw the swords, but after seeing the prisoners forced back, they couldn't contain their emotions. Gideon and Bennett took a few more steps back before observing their enemy. They put on airs and pretended like they weren't fazed. The instant they laid eyes on the young man and the elderly man standing side by side, their mood lifted and their crazed smiles returned to their faces. It was Hyde and Trey. "You two should have stayed hidden," Gideon said, anticipating another round with Hyde. Bennett smirked when he saw Trey. "Showing yourselves in front of us again is a grave mistake." The army sought justice for Hyde and Trey and defended them. "Why are you two so confident? Mr. Hyde and Mr. Trey just knocked you back. What's so funny about that?" "I thought they couldn't get crazier than this, but I was wrong." Gideon and Bennett turned to the crowd with mocking expressions. "We almost killed these two when we were inside the prison. What's there to be afraid of?" The army didn't listen. They only believed what they saw with their own eyes. Hyde and Trey had forced them back, and that was a fact. Gideon and Bennett were probably quibbling to lower their morale. "How shameless, as expected of someone detained in 7 Stars prison. Did you forget what just happened? Stop talking nonsense." Amidst the criticisms, one of the lieutenants came forward. "Bennett, Gideon, if you surrender now, we'll consider leaving your corpses intact." Bennett and Gideon were puzzled. They didn't know why these people were so confident. Did they really think Hyde and Trey could stop them? Gideon was getting impatient with all the chatter. His pythons swooped down from the sky and rushed at the lieutenant. The lieutenant was rooted to the ground from the pressure of the python's aura. He didn't expect Gideon to attack so suddenly when they'd lost the upper hand. "Don't even think about it," Hyde said. He manifested a golden serpent. Unlike before, it wasn't a phantom. It was real. Gideon stopped what he was doing and looked away from the lieutenant. "How did you increase your cultivation in such a short amount of time?" He raised his hand, and his pythons clashed with the serpent. A fierce fight broke out. Hyde's spear turned into a stream of light. It phased through his serpent and destroyed the python. Gideon was livid at the unfavorable turn of events. "I almost killed you before, and I can do it again." His pythons reappeared and fused into a massive beast. He and Hyde threw themselves into the fray and began to exchange blows. Chaos ensued. Bennett watched their battle. He had a suspicion that something wasn't right. Trey's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "It's time for us to begin." Columns of water materialized and shot through the clouds. The sky darkened, and lightning flashed as the sea began to rage. Bennett grinned and spread his hands. "It's good that you're here. I'm going to finish what I started." The skulls fused into a large skeletal blade and fell into his outstretched hands. After bearing the brunt of Yule's manifestation, it didn't look as intimidating as before. The blade was close to being scrapped. "This time, I won't lose," Trey said resolutely. His raging sea clashed with Bennett's blade. The aftershocks ravaged the vicinity, and the battlefield resembled the end of the world. When Bennett exchanged blows with Trey, his suspicion was confirmed. Their cultivation was on par. "What did you use? Did you take some kind of drug? Or is this the effect of a special technique?" Trey didn't let anything slip. "If you're scared, then just say so." Bennett laughed. "What's there to be afraid of? Whatever this is, it won't last for long. I'm guessing you have around 1 minute left, maybe 2 minutes. Unlike you, my cultivation is real. You're dead once this wears off." Trey knew that Bennett was right. He and Hyde had temporarily increased their cultivation with Kane's technique. There wasn't much time left. He was now close to the immortal realm, but could he defeat an opponent with the same cultivation in 2 minutes? On the other side, Gideon and Hyde were having a similar conversation. Their voices were drowned out by the battle's aftershocks, so the spectators couldn't hear what they were saying. The army had confidence that their allies would win. Some of them even started to chat. Our losses are significant. Mr. Huey was killed, and we don't know if Mr. Yule is alive. Even Mr. Gustav is dead. While the battle raged on outside, Jace was trying to suppress the prisoners who'd broken out of their cells inside the prison. He took a deep breath and lifted his hand. A whirlwind knocked the prisoners down before they could reach the ruined gate. He may have managed to stop them, but there were hordes of prisoners heading in this direction. Jace had done his best to stop as many of them as he could, but there was still quite a number of prisoners who'd escaped. As a peak Divine Grandmaster, if the array was still active, he could have suppressed the riots with a single technique. But the prisoners detained in the Seven Stars prison were all skilled martial artists, and they were dangerous criminals. Their cultivation ranged from various stages of the Grandmaster to the Divine Grandmaster realms. It wasn't easy to hold Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett back, but facing the rest of the prisoners alone was also a difficult task. Jace was a peak Divine Grandmaster, but while he was much stronger than those who were at the lower stages of the realm, they were ultimately at the same realm. Knocking them out in one blow was simply not possible. To take down one Divine Grandmaster, he needed about 10 moves. Facing a crowd of them was even more time-consuming and required more energy. Contrary to what the public believed, not all of the Empyrean Circle members were aristocrats. Jace was a martial artist who the Leviathan unit had independently trained. He had a more open-minded approach when it came to the country's affairs. As Jace was suppressing the riots, he couldn't stop worrying about what was going on outside. When he met up with Tegan earlier, he wanted to go with them and help them restrain the 3 prisoners. But Tegan had told him that of everyone in their group, his martial arts were more suitable to keeping the riots at bay. Hyde and Trey had been injured, but with Kane's technique active outside, the amplification of their cultivation would reduce the severity of their wounds. The higher one's cultivation, the more resilient they were to certain injuries. They could face Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett at their full strength without being held back by their wounds. Jace's cultivation was similar to Hyde's and Trey's after Kane's technique was activated, but Tegan had told him that if either Hyde or Trey were left behind in the prison, the moment the effects of Kane's technique wore off, they would relapse and feel the full severity of their wounds again. At that time, they would be swarmed by hordes of prisoners and would likely be killed. Jace wasn't injured, so it was safer for him to suppress the riots. Therefore, this was the only way to divide their group. Jace was left in charge of the prisoners inside, while Tegan, Hyde, and Trey would deal with Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett. Hyde was actually not the first person Jace had run into after their group left the room containing the core of the array and split up to deal with the riots. It was his friend and teammate, Huey. The second he'd caught sight of Huey, Enzo had killed him. Jace had sensed Enzo's aura and knew he wouldn't be a match for him. He would die a pointless death if he fought him, so he hid his presence and waited until Enzo left before bringing Huey's body to Tegan. While Jace was replaying that memory, anger welled up inside him. His attacks were more aggressive, and the prisoners were forced back. Just as he was about to attack another prisoner, the ground shook and a massive aura surfaced. It was far more intense than anyone he knew. Whoever it was, they were very close to reaching the immortal realm. Jace ignored the prisoner. He took a step forward and disappeared down the corridor. He left behind a trail on the floor that had been constructed from a material several times sturdier than steel. Within a few seconds, he emerged from the prison. A warm sensation spread through his meridians. This was most likely Kane's technique. But Jace didn't have time to dwell on it. An enormous shadow of a demonic being pounded on Tegan's sword formation, attempting to break through. It was on the verge of collapse after one strike. Tegan's original cultivation was similar to Gideon's and Bennett's. It had been enhanced by Kane's technique. While the amplification wasn't enough for him to cross over to the final realm, his strength had increased by at least tenfold. Tegan's sword formation was one of the strongest martial arts techniques from the United States Treasury, but it had been shaken by one attack. The armed forces were the elites of the country's military, but the battles taking place involved martial artists with a cultivation that far exceeded their own. Everything was happening so fast that they couldn't see what was happening clearly. They only knew that Tegan and Enzo were in a stalemate, and neither of them were backing down. Someone noticed Jace and pointed him out. "Who's that?" One of the colonels looked in his direction and smacked the head of the soldier who'd asked the question. Is that even a question? That's Jace Sinclair. He's part of the Empyrean Circle. His voice was loud, and in an instant, all of the spectators' eyes were on Jace. A soldier hurried over. Mr. Jace, what are your thoughts about this battle? One soldier who was blindly confident replied, It's obvious that our people are stronger. Jace reprimanded them. We're engaged in a life and death battle, and you're here making bets? Do you think the battlefield is a gambling house? The army stopped talking at once. Then someone muttered in a low voice, Mr. Gustav is dead, and we don't have anyone else to ask. We just wanted to know if we had any chance of winning. The soldier's words garnered a lot of approval. You want to know if we can win? Jace repeated in disgust. The army was clearly not taking the situation seriously. There was no victory without sacrifice. Tegan, Hyde, and Trey were putting their lives on the line, but the soldiers were treating their efforts like some kind of spectacle. The army didn't know why he was so upset, so they continued. Mr. Yule held his own against Gideon and Bennett. Now 2 members of the Cepheus subunit and another member of the Empyrean Circle have joined the battle. Isn't this a clear sign of our victory? Jace couldn't be bothered to talk to them anymore. If he got anything out of this conversation, it was that the hard work and struggles of those at the top could never be truly appreciated or understood by those at the bottom. Pay attention to the prison's entrance. Kill whoever steps past that gate. The soldiers naturally obeyed his command. One of them asked, Mr. Jace, what are you planning to do? Are you going to guard the prison with us? Jace glanced at Hyde and Trey, who were fighting in the sky. His hair and uniform fluttered even though there were no breeze. I'm going to take down the enemy. With that, Jace leaped into the air and shot into the sky. He joined the destructive battle in the blink of an eye. He circulated his inner energy and swung his fist at Gideon's blood-red beak. On the other side, Tegan was struggling to maintain his formation. He thought that with the enhancement of its cultivation and unique martial arts, he would have the strength to fight on par with Enzo. But the reality couldn't have been any further from the truth. Tegan's sword formation had been resisting the demonic being, but he sustained injuries every time they collided. It was a head-on clash of cultivation, and internal injuries were unavoidable because his cultivation was weaker. As for Enzo, the repeated collisions didn't have much of an overall effect on him. All he had to do was circulate his inner energy to heal his injuries. If this continued, Tegan wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. Enzo enjoyed watching him struggle. Is that it, Tegan? Are you done? Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett considered Tegan an old rival. He was the one who'd captured them back then. But many decades had passed, and their cultivation had changed drastically since then. Tegan knew he didn't stand a chance against Enzo, but he couldn't back down, not after what he'd done. You killed my brother. Today, it's either you die or I die. Enzo was slightly taken aback. Is Emery dead? He thought about the mysterious man in a black robe and grasped the situation. Isn't it a good thing he's dead? He was old, but he was still stuck at the Divine Grandmaster realm. What's the point of living? You should be happy his worthless life came to an end. Enzo's provocation worked like he'd predicted. Tegan took the bait. I'll make you regret those words. I'll stop at nothing to avenge my brother. Tegan formed a hand seal. His sword formation emitted a red light, and its strength was greatly enhanced. Enzo had been waiting for this. His manifestation imitated his movements and pounded the sword formation relentlessly. The 2 of them were locked in a fierce battle. Tegan, Hyde, Emery, and 4 others had been a team for a long time, even before they'd met the Leviathan unit. They'd practiced martial arts and trained together for as long as they could remember. It had been 200 years since they first met. The mountains and rivers had changed, but the 7 of them were still around. They were as close as family and regarded each other as siblings. Neither Tegan nor Hyde had expected one of them to leave the world so suddenly. This grief had turned into anger, and they redirected their emotions at Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett, who were most likely the culprits of the riots. The 3 of them were close to the immortal realm, and they were the only inmates who stood a chance against Emery. On the other hand, Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett had been longtime rivals with Tegan's team. To them, it didn't matter even if they were falsely accused of killing Emery and destroying the array. As for the other prisoners, most of them didn't know who had instigated the riots. In the midst of the chaos, the man in a black robe and Odin had blended in with the crowd and slipped away without being noticed. Meanwhile, Jace had wanted to help Tegan, who was in a dangerous position, but Tegan and Enzo's cultivation was out of his league, so there wasn't much he could contribute. As such, he decided to help Hyde and Trey instead. After taking Gideon and Bennett down, the three of them could assist Tegan together. If his plan went smoothly, there'd be a slim chance of victory. That was Jace's quick evaluation of the situation when he came out of prison. After giving instructions to the armed forces, he leapt into the sky to provide assistance. As he was approaching, he assessed Hyde's and Trey's battlefields to decide who to help first. Both sides had cultivation close to the immortal realm, but because of varying martial arts techniques, each battle had progressed differently. Bennett was obsessed with fighting, and killing brought him great satisfaction. This was expressed in his martial arts and his dark aura. Trey cultivated a unique martial arts technique from the Oceanic clan. Water flowed endlessly, and storms rumbled overhead. The battle was intense, but it was difficult to determine the final victor. Bennett was attacking while Trey was defending. They were caught in a stalemate. Even if Jace joined the battle, it would take him and Trey a while to defeat Bennett, because Trey's martial arts specialized in defense rather than offense. And so, Jace could only turn his attention to the other battlefield. Hyde was a master of the spear. With his serpent and his spear, he was engaged in an intense fight with Gideon's manifestation. Martial artists who wielded spears were typically on the front lines because they were both skilled in offense and defense. As for his opponent, Gideon, he cultivated the dark arts. He used his own blood as a basis for his martial arts techniques. He'd manifested a sea of blood and a beast formed from pythons to try and consume Hyde and his serpent. From what Jace could tell, Gideon was expanding his inner energy much faster than Hyde. Therefore, if he helped Hyde, they could take Gideon down faster than if he were to help Trey take Bennett down. Jace gathered the wind in his palm. He tore through the storm that surrounded Hyde and Gideon and descended on the battlefield. Their battle had reached a critical point. The serpent had torn the beast's neck apart, while the beast had gouged on the serpent's internal organs. Hyde and Gideon were covered in blood, and their auras were weak. Jace didn't hesitate to attack Gideon. "Mr. Hyde, I'll lend you a hand." The interference drew Hyde and Gideon's attention, but the reactions couldn't have been any more different. Gideon looked very displeased, while Hyde was pleasantly surprised to see a familiar face. Both sides had sustained considerable injuries. At this crucial moment, a third party with equal cultivation joined the fight. He would be the determining factor of the battle's victor. Gideon glowered at Jace. "This is not your fight." He was aware that Hyde and Jace's cultivation had increased through some external means. It wouldn't last much longer, but right now, their strength was real. If he didn't go all out, he would be killed. The sea of blood rippled and transformed into a set of scales that assembled itself onto the beast's body. Its aura skyrocketed, and it grew another head. With a swing of its tail, Jace was forced back. His wind dissipated in a turbulent gust. "Ever since our battle 100 years ago, no one else has forced me to use this technique," Gideon said. "Be honored you have the chance to see it for yourselves before you die." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Hyde retorted. "Did you forget? I broke through your armor of blood back then, and I can do it again today. Jace, stand back. Watch carefully as I avenge my brother." If this was a normal battle, Jace would have let Hyde do whatever he wanted, but time was of the essence. "Mr. Hyde, we need to work together and take him down quickly. We're pressed for time." Hyde didn't see it that way. "Are you underestimating me?" Jace had dealt with Hyde's stubborn personality before, so he knew how to handle him. He calmly replied, "Mr. Tegan is fighting to the death with Enzo. Things aren't looking too good for him. If we don't deal with Gideon soon and help him out, I'm afraid—" Jace didn't finish his sentence, but he believed that it was enough for Hyde to catch on to his implied meaning. Sure enough, Hyde stopped protesting and accepted his help. Gideon was furious when they ignored him to have a conversation of their own. They were clearly looking down on him. "I'll use you two as blood sacrifices." Jace didn't spare him a glance. He only turned his attention toward him after persuading Hyde. What's the hurry? The outcome has already been decided. A light breeze picked up, ruffling his hair and uniform. He flexed his hand, and the wind gathered at his fingertips. Hyde didn't say anything, but he followed up with Jace's attack. When he brandished his spear, another crack ran down its length. The spear he'd used for most of his life had been broken during his first fight with Gideon. This was a substitute he'd found lying around in the prison. In a normal battle, he could have maintained the spear with his inner energy, but given how intense the current battle was, he didn't have any to spare. The spear wasn't that far off from shattering completely. Fortunately, it held up just as he finished infusing his inner energy into it. Hyde grabbed the center of the spear, stepped back, and threw it toward Gideon's manifestation. The spear turned into a golden stream of light that streaked across the horizon. It transformed back into a serpent and crashed into the two-headed beast with a roar. Gideon was intimidated by Jace and Hyde's combined attacks, but there was no other option to face them directly. His beast opened its mouth to swallow their two attacks at the same time. When Jace's wind and Hyde's serpent collided with the beast, a violent explosion erupted, spanning half a mile in the air. Normal people would have been killed instantly. Even martial grandmasters wouldn't have been able to hold on for long. But with their cultivation, environmental factors wouldn't affect them in the slightest. Jace observed the center of the explosion from the ground. Did we succeed? Hyde landed next to him. I don't know. The smoke in the sky dispersed a few seconds later, revealing an unbelievable scene. The blood-red beast had countered the wind and the serpent. They were in a stalemate. Hyde was in disbelief. He rushed to launch another attack, but his wounds had reopened from the battle, and he erupted into a fit of coughs. Jace patted Hyde's back and transferred his inner energy to help regulate his breathing. Don't worry, it's over. As he spoke, the wind and the serpent broke through the beast's defenses and pierced its head. It let out a wail before disappearing. Gideon was lying not too far away in a miserable state. His sage-like appearance was gone, and he was covered in wounds. He kept coughing up blood. He tried to get up, but to no avail. It was evident that he was heavily injured. Hyde pushed Jace's hand away. I'll finish him off. As he made his way to Gideon, Jace held out his arm to stop him. There's no time for that. The army will take him into custody. We need to help Trey. After we take Bennett down, we three can assist Tegan. The armed forces had already hurried over to Gideon and were preparing to bind his wrists with shackles. Hyde was silent as he watched them. We've taken care of one of the culprits behind my brother's death. There's two left. Jace tried to comfort him, but he waved dismissively. I'm fine. Go and help Trey first. I'll take a short break and join you later. With that, Hyde sat down and closed his eyes, entering a meditative state. Jace called the soldiers over to guard Hyde. They were excited to see a member of the Cepheus subunit in person. Before they could run up to him, Jace stopped them. He's injured and currently recuperating. Don't disturb him. Make sure none of the prisoners get close to him. The soldiers stood at attention. Understood. Jace gave them a nod and leaped back into the sky. He headed toward the raging sea and the army of skulls. In the vortex, Trey and Bennett were engaged in an intense battle. This is the most fun I've had in ages, Bennett said with a laugh. What techniques are you using? If you tell me, I'll tell you how to create a blade from skulls. Trey was insulted that his mystical technique, which had been passed down in his clan for hundreds of years, was being compared to the dark arts like Bennett's. I'll tell you when you're back in your cell. I have no interest in your technique. Bennett didn't care about his rude remarks. His only hobby was to fight and kill martial artists from all walks of life. During their first fight in prison, he'd almost killed Trey with no effort at all. He was curious about his martial arts and how he'd gotten so much stronger. If you don't want to tell me, then forget it. Bennett lifted his weapon, infusing his black aura into the blade and expanding its size. He lunged for Trey with his blade raised. Bennett's blade was capable of slicing an aircraft carrier in half and demolishing half of a city. Trey wasn't intimidated. Bennett's blade was powerful, and he wasn't using any special techniques. Their cultivation was currently similar, and one blade wasn't enough to take him down. Trey tightened his grip on his sword. It rippled and gleamed like the reflective surface of the water. With one slash, he sent an endless stream of water toward the skeletal blade. Every time Bennett deflected the water, his blade lost 15% of its strength. By the time the water disappeared, his blade had completely lost its offensive power. I've never fought a martial artist who plays with water before. Your martial arts are impressive. Are you out of tricks? Trey said sarcastically. Bennett spread his arms, exposing his chest. Then why don't you attack me directly? Trey didn't respond, and Bennett laughed at his reaction. He knew Trey's strongest technique was the sea he'd conjured, but it didn't provide any offensive abilities, and only served to increase his own strength. While Trey's manifestation held quite a bit of force behind its creation and could take down martial artists of a lower realm, it wasn't enough to harm those with the same cultivation. Martial arts techniques of the water attribute emphasized the concept of eternal life. They were mainly focused on defensive and supportive properties. Trey didn't possess any significant offensive techniques against a martial artist with the same cultivation. If he attacked Bennett directly, he wouldn't be able to land a finishing blow, while Bennett wouldn't be able to break through his defense. This was a stark contrast to Hyde and Gideon. Both of them specialized in offensive martial arts, and the battle would only end if either Hyde or Gideon died. Even if Bennett used his strongest technique, he couldn't shatter Trey's defenses. If the battle dragged on like this, they would need more than 3 days to determine the victor. However, time was not on Trey's side. Kane's technique was reaching its end. Once the effects wore off, his cultivation would return to normal, and Bennett would finish him off in one move. There was a substantial difference between a peak divine grandmaster and a martial artist close to the immortal realm. It didn't matter how strong Trey's defenses were in the face of overwhelming strength. They were locked in a stalemate, and Trey had no means of gaining the advantage. Moreover, it was unlikely for Tegan and Hyde to wrap up their respective battles to assist him. It was clear that Tegan was no match for Enzo. It was already a miracle he was able to drag out this battle for this long. Hyde's cultivation was now similar to Gideon's, but there was a 50-50 chance of either side winning. Even if Hyde won, he would have sustained serious injuries, and his combat strength would be reduced by 70%. It wouldn't be enough to take Bennett down. Knowing that he was dragging out the battle only to die by his opponent's hand in the end wasn't a pleasant feeling, but Trey stood his ground. It was his duty to fight for the country. If he gave up here, who would hold Bennett back? Just as he made up his mind to fight to the death, they heard a familiar, annoying voice filled with concern. Trey, I'm here to help. Jace was fussy and nagged way too much. Trey usually found his voice tiresome, and it still was, but right now it was music to his ears. Bennett turned around with his guard up. This young man was also close to the immortal realm. He liked to toy with martial artists and kill them when they were in despair, but that didn't mean he wanted to experience his victim's perspective. Who are you? I'm Jace Sinclair, a member of the Empyrean Circle, but everyone attaches honorifics to my name these days. Why don't you give it a try? Bennett frowned at his introduction, but Jace paid him no mind. He went on. It's an honor to finally meet you. I hope you can do me a favor. Please accept my fist. Without waiting for Bennett's answer, Jace closed the distance between them in a rush of wind. He was so fast that Bennett didn't have time to react properly, even with his guard up. Jace threw out his fist with so much force that it pushed the air aside, forming a vacuum. His speed continued to increase indefinitely. But despite his profound martial arts, Jace was still a human. The speed of his attacks couldn't reach the speed of light. He understood his limitations, but while he couldn't achieve the speed of light, he could exceed the speed of sound by over 100 times. Bennett's confidence faltered for the second time that day. He couldn't dodge it. Even if he wanted to try, he wasn't sure if he was fast enough to pull that off. Jace's attack wouldn't be fatal, but it would cause him significant damage and stun him momentarily. That would give Jace and Trey the opening they needed to finish him off. Bennett thought quickly and lifted his blade. It had originally been 3,000 feet long. After coming in contact with Trey's water, it had shrunk to only 300 feet. But even a 300 feet long blade was difficult to swing and defend against an enemy that was right in front of him. It was essentially the same as an adult waving a kitchen knife around, trying to kill a fly. The success rate was extremely low. But Bennett was not a normal martial artist. When he was the one wielding the blade, it was as precise as a scalpel in the hands of the most brilliant surgeon. His blade clashed with Jace's fist directly. Jace packed a powerful punch, but he couldn't maintain the same intensity for long. In a fight between a martial artist who used his fist and a martial artist who used a weapon, the one with the weapon had the advantage. Seemingly having foreseen his victory, Bennett grinned in anticipation. He enjoyed killing martial artists when they were at the peak of their despair and hopelessness. But when he looked at Jace to take his expression, he found that he was smiling without a trace of distress. "Did you forget about me?" Trey called out from the side. The sea raged, and a bolt of lightning struck Bennett. Although the lightning could have split a mountain in half, it wasn't enough to injure a martial artist close to the immortal realm. But it had an additional effect: temporary paralysis. Bennett realized this when a numbing sensation spread through his body. Jace retracted his fist and dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade as it crashed down. He threw out another punch, aiming for Bennett's head. Bennett couldn't move, so he had no way of avoiding it. He could only circulate his inner energy towards his head and take the attack directly. A dull sound rang out when Jace's fist connected. Bennett was sent careening to the ground and crashed into a ruined pillar. "We can't relax yet," Trey warned. "That punch wasn't enough to knock him out. At most, he's only injured." Jace nodded. "I know. Back me up. I'm going to finish this with one more move." "Got it," Trey said. Jace snapped his fingers and a shadow of a wolf appeared behind him. He dove from the sky toward the ground, rushing straight at Bennett, who was still in a daze. The wolf jumped through the air and followed him. They closed the distance in a span of a few seconds. Bennett wasn't known as a notorious criminal for anything. He managed to gain his bearings just as Jace reached him. In his haste, he only had enough time to grab his blade and block the incoming attack. "After this, you'll be going back to prison." The wolf turned into a stream of light and swirled around Jace's arm. He flexed his hand and swung his fist with Trey enhancing his strength from a distance. He was once again caught in a deadlock with Bennett's blade. Just as Bennett was about to try his luck unleashing one of his combat techniques, a fatal sound echoed in the air. A crack had appeared on his blade. Bennett was in disbelief as he watched the cracks multiply and spread to the edges. The blade shattered into pieces of bone that vanished in a scatter of black light. Without the blade, Bennett was left wide open. Jace's fist hit him square in the chest and sent him flying back and crashing half a mile away. No one knew if he was alive or dead, but one thing was for sure: he would be incapacitated for the time being. "Nice job," Trey said, coming over. He dispelled his manifestation, closed his eyes, and entered a meditative state to recover his inner energy. The battlefield fell into silence. Hyde walked up to them with a substitute spear in hand. "I'm ready. Let's help Tegan." Jace nodded and shook Trey's shoulder. "Let's go." Trey opened his eyes. "Okay. We'll break into their battle and attack Enzo together," Jace explained. "That will create an opportunity for Mr. Tegan. Is everyone clear on the plan?" Hyde and Trey nodded. The three of them activated their manifestations and leapt into the air. They were about to break through the storm surrounding the battle when Tegan's sword formation shattered. The 7 swords were blown away and scattered over the prison's vicinity below. Hyde rushed to catch Tegan when he lost his balance and brought him to the ground. Jace and Trey followed closely. Enzo hovered in the air, peering down at the masses below. "Is this all you're capable of, Tegan?" His voice attracted the armed forces' attention. They looked up in confusion, not knowing what had happened. Enzo descended from the sky with steady steps like he was walking down an invisible set of stairs. His demonic being was right behind him. He glanced at Trey's group. "Your cultivation and martial arts are impressive, so I'll give you 2 options. I'll be the new supreme leader. Submit to me or die. It's your choice." Hyde didn't hesitate to point his spear at Enzo. "That's not happening." Jace agreed. "There's no room for negotiations." "You want to make the country submit to you? Dream on," Trey said. Their determination motivated the armed forces, and they cheered them on. "Then all of you can go to hell." Enzo raised his hand, and his demonic being flew over the city of Annapolis. "We can't let him destroy the city!" Tegan shouted in alarm. He leaped back into the sky. Hyde, Trey, and Jace followed suit. Yule had just regained consciousness and recovered enough from his injuries to move around. He crawled out of the rubble and joined the battle. Today was the darkest day in the history of Annapolis. Numerous prisoners had escaped from the Seven Stars prison, and the lives of hundreds of thousands of troops had been lost. The casualties included the general responsible for Annapolis's defense, Gustav, one member of the Empyrean Circle, Huey Sterling, and one member of the Cepheus subunit, Emery. The Leviathan unit's leader slammed his fist on the table as he read through the report. He took out an intricate token from an antique box. "Contact Mr. Adams." Throughout the United States' long history, the Seraphim token had only existed in legends. No one knew exactly when it made its last appearance. The owner of the token had access to an endless amount of power, influence, and wealth. With this token in hand, one could give orders to most of the population in the country, starting from the Leviathan unit to the civilians. And they would have to obey unconditionally. "Contact Mr. Adams," the leader of the unit instructed. "He's the only one who can restore our country's peace." The Leviathan unit took the token and secretly set off for Washington, D.C. The residents of the district weren't aware of the incoming disaster. They went about their daily lives like every other day. "Stephen, Grandpa's birthday is tomorrow," Kim said as she applied her makeup in front of the mirror. "Is the gift ready?" "I prepared it a while back," Stephen replied with a smile. He was gently combing his daughter's hair. "Daddy, you're pulling my hair too hard," Valeria complained. Stephen quickly slowed down when he heard that. Nothing major had happened in the past 6 months. Stephen had been enjoying a peaceful life with his family. After spending many years on the battlefield, he hadn't realized he longed for a comfortable and normal life until his daughter was born. He hoped these uneventful days could continue forever. "Harry and Rebecca haven't given up yet," Kim grumbled. "They're still trying to take over Skyreach Corporation." Because it had been too troublesome to manage the two companies separately, Kim and Stephen had decided to merge the Wyvern Group and Tanith Corporation and rebrand the company as Skyreach Corporation. Kim had a high status in the Fallon family, but she wasn't treated that well in the Cassidy family. Helen was still hoping for Harry and Rebecca to take over her business. It wasn't necessarily because she didn't like Kim. It was mainly because of Stephen. Helen had never had a good impression of him. In her opinion, the family's reputation was at risk the longer he remained with them. She repeatedly hinted for Kim to dump Stephen and divorce him. Kim knew what Helen was trying to imply, but every time, she'd hinted back that the divorce wasn't happening. Because DeAndre favored Kim so much, Helen couldn't openly deal with Stephen. This had become her biggest crisis as of late. DeAndre's birthday was tomorrow, and as a member of the Cassidy family, Kim had to bring Stephen and Valeria to attend the celebration. At the party, Harry, Rebecca, and the others would have the opportunity to criticize Stephen, while Helen would have an excuse to humiliate him and drive him out of the family. DeAndre wouldn't stop them unless things got out of hand. Although he doted on Kim, he didn't approve of Stephen being her husband. And if Kim wanted to protect him, it wouldn't be easy even with her status. "Grandpa's upcoming birthday is an important one," Kim said. "I was going to spend $1 billion to buy him a gift, but you said you had the perfect gift in mind. What did you get him?" "I asked my friends in the army to get an antique from ancient China for me. It's not that valuable to aristocratic families, but it's still a rare item to the Cassidy family." "That's a great gift. They won't be able to criticize you for not bringing something suitable." "Even if they do, I can just ignore them." Stephen tied Valeria's hair into a ponytail. "I'm done. Do you like it?" Valeria examined her appearance in the mirror. She tilted her head to the side and ran her hand through her hair. "Daddy, you're getting better and better at doing my hair." Kim nodded in agreement. Indeed, his craftsmanship is getting better as the days passed. It's nothing like when he first started. Stephen chuckled.
With such a cute daughter and a beautiful wife, I have to work hard. Valeria, is there anywhere you want to go? I want to go to the amusement park.
Before Stephen could agree, Kim interrupted. Did you finish your homework yet? Bring it over, I'll take a look. Valeria pouted, knowing where her mother was going with this.
I'm almost done. I'll finish the rest when we get back.
No, Kim said sternly. We'll go after you finish your homework. Valeria had been switched from a smaller class to a larger class at the kindergarten. Her teachers assigned her daily homework, but like most children, Valeria had no interest in homework and wanted to play all day. Kim had been trying to think of ways to get her to finish her homework on time. Valeria tugged on Stephen's shirt and blinked at him, signaling that she needed his help. He gave her a subtle smile in return, indicating that he would take care of it. Kim saw their secret conversation and turned around. As for you, Stephen, you can't always agree to everything she wants. Under her intense gaze, Valeria and Stephen stared at the floor and acknowledged her scolding. With Stephen's guidance, Valeria finally finished her homework, and the three of them went to the amusement park. In the evening, after dinner, Stephen told Kim and Valeria that he was heading out to take a stroll. He went to the pavilion in the garden and looked up at the moon. A man in a mask and a black uniform appeared and knelt on one knee beside him. When Stephen was at the amusement park in the afternoon, he'd spotted the symbol of the palace's secret guards. They had something to report to him. He subtly left his own message and told them to come see him when his family wasn't around. Mr. Adams, the Western and Eastern Guardians informed us that Annapolis is in chaos. Among the Empyrean Circle, one was killed while 3 others were heavily injured. One member of the Cepheus subunit was also killed. Stephen frowned. Give me a rundown of the situation. According to the palace members stationed in Annapolis, the criminals detained in the Seven Stars prison broke out. Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett were the ringleaders. There were many prisoners who escaped during the chaos and scattered throughout the country. The Empyrean Circle and the Cepheus subunit were barely able to suppress the riots. Stephen was aware of the Seven Stars prison. It was the second largest prison in the U.S., and it detained some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. The prisoners were all martial artists, and quite a number of them practiced the dark arts. While the Abyssal Penitentiary was known as the most secure prison in the world, aside from exceptions like Vito, there were fewer martial artists among the prisoners. They were influential figures, but most of them didn't have the strength to break out. We've discovered that there are 3 prisoners heading to the district, the guard reported. They're coming from Santa Ana. How would you like us to deal with them? Stephen thought about it. The higher-ups are probably tracking them down already. We might not need to step in. Just in case, tell Wes and Aston to keep a closer eye on my family, and tell Nor to lead a team to assist them. Understood, the guard replied respectfully. He left to pass on the message. Stephen sighed as he stared at the sky. Another storm was coming. Dale Fallon, the strongest martial artist among the aristocratic families, would probably only rank in the middle when compared to the prisoners. All of them held deep resentment towards the U.S., and during the battle near the Seven Stars prison, the country had nearly lost half of their elite troops. The remainder of the army was just barely enough to protect Annapolis, let alone the other states. Stephen had retired, and if he had a choice, he would choose not to get involved in the mess at all. But he had a feeling that he'd be drawn into the conflict sooner or later. At the Leviathan unit's headquarters, the leader of the unit looked like he'd aged a decade from stress. During the battle at the prison, 1 member had been killed, while 3 were heavily injured from both the Empyrean Circle and the Cepheus subunit. Huey from the Empyrean Circle had been killed in battle. Yule and Jace were one of the strongest combat forces in the Circle. They were ranked 2nd and 4th, respectively. Trey had also been present during the battle, and the 3 of them had almost died. As for the Cepheus subunit, Emery, the member ranked 3rd, was dead. Tegan and Hyde were in charge of the offense, while Kane was responsible for maintaining the technique. The 3 of them were skilled in their respective specialties, but the 3 of them had almost been killed. With how grave the situation had become, the leader was losing his patience. Have they informed Mr. Adams yet? His subordinate, who was being interrogated, broke out in a cold sweat. He chose his words carefully. Because of how many prisoners escaped, the railways and airports to other areas in the country have been cut off from Annapolis. The team we sent to Washington, D.C. had to lay low to avoid drawing the prisoners' attention, so they're taking a detour. The leader understood this, but it was hard not to get impatient. In the end, he waved his subordinate away. Tell them to hurry. If they take one more day, our losses will increase by another day. Mr. Adams was the only one who could handle veto. We need him to defend our country against the prisoners. Yes, sir. His subordinate hurried out of the room. When the leader was alone, he let out a long sigh. He hoped the country could survive this predicament. Less than half a day had passed since the riots at the prison. The Leviathan unit had prevented the news from spreading to avoid inciting panic and alerting foreign countries. But the prisoners who'd escaped were on the move. It would only be a matter of time before they started wreaking havoc. The foreign countries would catch wind of their predicament soon, and those who were hostile to the U.S. would never pass up this opportunity. Especially Warhawk. If they found out, they would secretly lend their assistance to the prisoners and ally with other hostile countries to launch a joint attack against the U.S. When the predicament escalated to that point, the U.S. would have conflicts both internally and externally. The war with the alliance would repeat itself, and the country would be at risk of being ruined from within and from the forces across the ocean. Stephen was their only hope. Shortly after the riots at the prison, 3 prisoners headed to Santa Ana. The Barclay family was one of the wealthiest families in the city. The upper class showered them with flattery and fear of being suppressed. The Barclay family was known as a local tyrant in the city, but today their resistance had been splattered with blood. Piles of bodies were in their courtyard. Their corpses had been torn to pieces. The maids and butlers were running for their lives. Priceless cultural artifacts and porcelain antiques had been scattered on the ground, but no one spared a glance. Their lives were at stake. The head of the family was trembling like a leaf on the floor. Who are you? Why are you doing this? We're the Barclay family. You can't treat us like this. A man who was flexing his claws glanced in the direction before wordlessly tossing the corpse of one of the family members in front of him. You called yourselves the #1 family in Santa Ana. It's been a while since I came back to the city. I was expecting more from you. The head of the family looked at the bloody body. It was his favorite grandson. Do you still call yourselves the family ranked first in the city? The man asked mockingly. The head of the family regretted making false claims. No, why would we? We're not ranked first. The Haynes family is. They're connected with the Cassidy family from Los Angeles. We're just a normal family. He had been jealous when the Haynes family rode the Cassidy family's coattails and rose to fame. He had spread rumors that the Barclay family was ranked first in Santa Ana because he didn't want to lose to them. The Haynes family's attention was focused on the Cassidy family, so they didn't care what they were doing in the city. At that time, the head of the Barclay family was thrilled, but he never expected that one small lie would lead to the massacre today. The man showed an interest. Haynes family? Cassidy family? Tell me more about them. The head of the family rushed to explain. The Haynes family used to be a small family in Santa Ana with only millions of assets to their name. One of their daughters married into the Cassidy family from Los Angeles. Later on, it was discovered that the head of the Cassidy family was an aristocrat. Their ties with the aristocrats pushed them into the spotlight, and they became known as ranked first in the country. The Haynes family also benefited because of their familial connection. The man crouched down and stared at him. From what you're saying, I should find the Haynes family and start trouble with them instead of you. Is that right? The head of the family didn't notice the implication in his words and hurriedly agreed. Yes, our family has nothing to do with this. In that case, you are of no use to me. The head of the family nodded without thinking, but then he realized what he was agreeing to. The man smiled, revealing yellow and black teeth. You said it yourself. He snapped the head of the family's neck in one smooth motion. His head rolled to the side with terror etched on his face. Two men pushed open the door and stepped into the gore-stained hall. Did you kill them already, Jakari? The man in the lead asked. What a waste, the second man said regretfully. Why didn't you leave at least one of them alive? I could have used them as test subjects for my poison. The man crouching on the floor wiped his hands and glared. Stop complaining, Claus. Why are we even sticking together? I don't want anything to do with you. The man in the lead interjected. Stop arguing, Jakari. Did you at least get the information I asked for? Of course I did. Who do you think I am, Anton? If we want to take over California, there's only one family we have to eliminate. The Cassidy family. Their current residence is in Washington, D.C. Good work, Anton said. First, we'll attack the local government and make them lose their leader. After that, we'll attack the Cassidy family and kill them all. That will be our first step to take over California. Anton, Claus, and Jakari were three criminals who wreaked havoc in California 100 years ago. Many lives were lost because of them. Eventually, the state's martial artists and the #1 families in Santa Ana and Los Angeles cooperated with the government to capture them and threw them into the Seven Stars prison. Following the riots, the three of them had mingled with the crowd and escaped. Their first goal after regaining their freedom was to destroy the #1 family in Santa Ana. But they'd disappeared without a trace, so they targeted the current family ranked first instead. As it turned out, their rank was false. Under the cover of the night, the three of them rushed to Washington, D.C. Stephen and Kim woke up early the next morning. Today was DeAndre's birthday, and it was an important day. In wealthy families, when an elder's birthday came around, every member of the younger generation had to prepare a suitable gift. Their sincerity was proven by how precious and valuable the gift was. Wealthy families followed strict rules, and the members took every opportunity to make things difficult for those who weren't favored. While Kim was getting ready, she thought about the Cassidy family and about how much they didn't like Stephen. It was almost guaranteed that they would harass him during the celebration. She glanced at Stephen. He was busy packing the antique into a gift box without a care in the world. If he were still the commander, the Cassidy family and even the Fallon family wouldn't have the courage to be in the same space as him. She detested their hypocritical mindset. Stephen sensed her gaze and looked at her. His hands didn't stop moving. What's up? It's nothing, Kim replied. Focus. Don't drop the gift. Stephen casually closed the box with a proud look on his face. Not to worry. As you know, my craftsmanship is top-notch these days. Kim rolled her eyes and went into the bedroom to wake Valeria up. She helped her wash up and put on her dress. The three of them left the house and got in the car. Kim drove to the Cassidy family's residence in a Bugatti Veyron that was worth millions. Today was a special day. She'd asked the driver to take a day off and personally drive to her family's house to show her sincerity. As their sports cars passed through traffic and reached the Cassidy family's residence, Stephen's phone buzzed. They were in a small, enclosed space, so the vibration echoed in the car. Who is it? Kim asked without turning her head to focus on the road. Stephen took out his phone and read the message. No one, it's just spam. Kim didn't think too much of it and pulled up to the entrance. The mansion's staff guided her to the garage. Remember to turn off your phone or leave it on silent during the party, she reminded Stephen as she parked the car. Grandpa hates interruptions. Okay, got it. As soon as they stepped into the house, a mocking voice called out to them. Is that you, Kim? You're so busy. I didn't think you'd remember Grandpa's birthday. Kim looked over and saw Rebecca with heavy makeup standing not too far away. Our company is none of your business. Isn't it about time you gave up? For the past 6 months, Harry and Rebecca had repeatedly tried to pressure her into handing over Skyreach Corporation. With Kim's reputation in the family, Helen couldn't oppose her directly, so she used her status as an elder to help him. Kim didn't want to bother DeAndre with trivial matters, so she let him be. They didn't see each other all that much anyway. But when they met, they fought like cats and dogs. Are you slandering me? Rebecca demanded. What do you mean slandering? Kim shot back. You and I both know what's really going on here. Harry came over with a smile and tried to smooth things over. What do you want, Harry? If you have nothing to say, then don't bother me. Harry was furious at Kim's attitude, but he stayed calm. He would teach her a lesson later. I'm just here to remind you that today is Grandpa's birthday. Don't let your personal feelings get in the way. Rebecca saw her chance to get back at Kim. My brother's right. Today is Grandpa's birthday. Why are you starting a fight? Their petty tricks had annoyed Kim to no end. Now that they were having a face-to-face confrontation, her anger, which had accumulated for the past 6 months, threatened to let loose. Just as she was about to go off on them, a warm hand held her wrist. Kim, don't get upset. They're not worth it. Kim looked back to see Stephen holding her hand. Valeria was hugging his leg, looking up at them curiously. She didn't completely understand why they were arguing. Sorry, I got carried away, Kim said apologetically. Harry was glad that Stephen had stepped up to mediate, but as soon as this thought crossed his mind, he felt unpleasant. Since when did he need this good-for-nothing's help? He and Rebecca didn't think too highly of Stephen, but he was the only one who could keep Kim in check. Seeing Kim's anger subside, Harry spoke up again, but he wasn't as friendly as before. I don't know what gift you've prepared, but you have a high status in the Fallon family, and your husband is a former commander. Your gift must be priceless, right? If Grandpa doesn't like it, you'll become a laughing stock. We've invited all the influential figures from Los Angeles. There will be consequences if you embarrass Grandpa in front of them. Stephen gave Harry a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You don't have to worry about that. Our gift is more than appropriate. Harry and Rebecca would have scorned him for saying that, because whatever he obtained was usually because of Kim's connections. But this time, they didn't say much. They'd come up with a plan to suppress Kim and humiliate Stephen, and they were certain that it would succeed. Harry kept the same fake smile on his face. Okay, we'll wait for it then. He and Rebecca left without saying anything else. The Cassidy family and the guests had overheard the brief commotion. They could sense hostility between Kim's family and Harry and Rebecca. Kim was in no mood to greet the guests. The three of them took their seats and waited for the celebration to begin. Stephen, thanks for stopping me earlier, Kim whispered, leaning over. I don't know why, but I've been getting upset over every little thing recently. It's not a big deal. Maybe you've been working too hard lately. Why don't you take a break? Stephen suggested. Yeah, maybe. Okay, I'll wrap things up at work and leave the rest to my assistants for a while. While they were talking, a woman followed several people through the main entrance. She spotted her daughter at a table and walked over. Kim, how are you doing? Kim was surprised to see Natalie. Mom, why are you here? Birthdays were festive occasions, but it was usually the younger generation who attended, not the elders. She looked past Natalie and saw the Haynes family's elders. They were even less likely to attend events like these. Natalie shrugged. There's nothing wrong with me being here, so why not? It's your grandfather's birthday after all. It's only right that we participate. Her words couldn't disguise the greed in her eyes. Stephen had met many people like Natalie in the past, but she was Kim's mother, so he greeted her with a smile. How have you been, Mom? Natalie glanced at him, displeased. If it weren't for some absurd agreement, Kim could have found a much better husband. She was about to start nagging him when Valeria, who was sitting on his lap, greeted her too. Hello, Grandma. Natalie wasn't fond of Stephen, but her little granddaughter was adorable. She swallowed the words she was going to say and gave Valeria a warm smile. DeAndre made his entrance on the main platform. He was old, but he was energetic for his age. Walking up the stairs wasn't the slightest bit of an inconvenience for him. He helped Helen onto the platform, and they both took their seats. The guests below the stage broke into discussion. Mrs. Helen and Mr. DeAndre are a match made in heaven. They're such a loving couple. They say that the head of the family went missing for more than 10 years. Mrs. Helen led the family when he was gone, and when he came back, it was revealed that he was an aristocrat. What a plot twist. Mrs. Helen suffered a lot, but it wasn't in vain. After her husband came back, the Cassidy family rose up the ranks and took over first place. Most of the guests used to be more influential than the Cassidy family, but the tables had turned, and they had to treat them with respect. They regretted looking down on them in the past. If they'd befriended the family back then, they wouldn't be walking on eggshells now. The younger generation of the Cassidy family felt a sense of superiority. Before they rose to fame, the guests had bullied them too many times to count. But now, even the lowest-ranking members of the family couldn't be underestimated. All of the families who'd treated them like dirt had sent their people to apologize and resolve the conflict. The Haynes family was perhaps the happiest family present. They used to be a small, insignificant family in Santa Ana. Their assets didn't amount to more than $10 million, which was similar to the Cassidy families. Back when Natalie married into the Cassidy family, everyone laughed at the Haynes family for marrying their daughter off to a lowlife like Kyle. He relied on his family's money to gamble, and he'd even had a run-in with the police. He was arrested and sent to prison for some time. But who would have thought that the Cassidy family had ties to the aristocrats? The Haynes family's reputation soared from the same familial connections that everyone had criticized them for. Many wealthy families were jealous of their good fortune. If they had the foresight to marry their own sons and daughters into the Cassidy family, their families would have been in the Haynes family's shoes right now. The Haynes family had risen to the top in Santa Ana by relying solely on their connection with the Cassidy family. It was in the guests' best interest to establish a relationship with either of the families to ensure their future. While the guests were thinking about how to approach the Cassidy and Haynes families, a young man with an intimidating aura walked up to the platform. One look and they could tell he wasn't ordinary. When he scanned the crowd, the guests felt like they were being judged. They wondered who he was. He was eye-catching, but they'd never seen him before. The young man answered their question as if he could read their minds. He didn't have a loudspeaker or a microphone on hand, but his voice projected throughout the hall. "I'm Joshua Fallon. The head of the Fallon family instructed me to host the celebration for his uncle's birthday. Do you have any other questions?" The guests were intrigued by his introduction. "I didn't know the Fallon family thought so highly of Mr. DeAndre. They sent one of their people to host the celebration. I thought Mr. DeAndre was just a random member of the Fallon family, but it turns out he's the head of the family's uncle. It's my dream to have the aristocrats celebrate my birthday." The guests' envy and jealousy intensified, along with the importance of having the Cassidy family on their side. There was a small commotion in the hall when the guests discovered DeAndre's identity. Joshua had never experienced this kind of scene before. He was an ordinary member of the Fallon family. He'd been practicing martial arts in seclusion since he was young, and he didn't know much about the outside world. Ordinary members of the family weren't given that many resources, and it wasn't easy for them to train. Joshua had always been on the lookout for missions from the family, so he could be awarded more resources. Hosting DeAndre's birthday party was a mission he'd accepted from Wayne. If it weren't for that, he would have never acted so submissive in front of these outsiders. Joshua was about to tell the guests to be quiet and stop disrupting the celebration when he noticed the look on DeAndre's face. DeAndre kept his expression neutral, but Joshua could tell that he was satisfied with the reception. Since that was the case, he decided to let the guests be.